are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
This episode of Rootbound is sponsored by Chlorophytum comosum. Don't be afraid, that's not a spider. It's a spider plant. Spider plant, the harmless houseplant with the creepy name.
Hello everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of Rootbound. I'm the host of the show, and my name is Steven. Rootbound is the podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, and each week I invite a guest who joins me on the show to share with us all about a plant that is meaningful to them, and then I share with the guest about a plant that is meaningful to me, and through this process we can all learn more about plants and learn more about each other. Now today might sound a little bit different than normal intros. It's got a little bit more reverb in my voice, and that's because I'm standing in the Kogod Atrium?
Kogod Courtyard.
Kogod Courtyard of the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C.
And American Art Museum.
And American Art Museum, that's right. It's both. And I have a guest, as you've heard, who's not the main guest of the show, but a very special guest nonetheless. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Virginia Thaxton. I am an interior horticulturist with Smithsonian Gardens. I've been working here for 5.5 years, and I take care of plants inside the museums, and I take care of this space called the Kogod Courtyard, where the guest is highlighted.
Wonderful, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But just one more little sound note is you can hear Virginia here watering some plants here in the garden, so that spraying sound is what you're hearing. So I think before we go and meet our guest, maybe explain what's going on in this courtyard space right now, what we're looking at.
Yes, right now we're actually at the end of a 3-month exhibition, orchid exhibition, that Smithsonian Gardens has been doing for 28 years. Alternating with the Botanic Garden, we co-hosted. So every other year, one of the institutions is the main host. And this is our 28th annual orchid exhibition. Every year, of course, the theme is orchids, but we try to think of different themes and different things to talk about orchids. This year, our title is Future of Orchids Conservation and Collaboration. And when we thought we wanted to talk about the future of the orchids, obviously concerns about how threatened they are in their natural habitats and what the story is with trying to conserve them, we realized that it takes collaboration. It's an effort that takes a lot of different fronts and aspects and facets of conservation to accomplish what you want, which is to preserve the wonderful family that orchids are for the future generations.
And so how does that factor into our friend Phaan, who's we're going to hear from in just a moment?
Yes, so this year, because we are doing the exhibition in between two wonderful art museums that the Smithsonian has, and because to us, horticulture is a mixture of the art and science of cultivating plants. So we wanted to include art in the exhibition, and Phaan came to us. I don't know the detailed stories of how she probably will tell you that, but she came to us as a collaborator because a lot of her art mentions the environment and preserving the environment, and she's very concerned with that. So she visited our greenhouses, she visited the orchid collection and got a lot of inspiration, and we wanted to incorporate art in the exhibit because in the planters where we put the orchids, we also have tropical plants and we have props and art that it's also a visual hook for people that want to stroll through the museum, and they're art lovers and they're like, oh, what is this in the middle? This is all these plants. And so the art also just highlights and makes things look even prettier. The orchids, of course, are art by themselves, but it is a nice combination.
Wonderful, yeah, and I'm just looking at all of these orchids, and it is just stunning. I don't know if I've ever been around so many different kinds of orchids.
Well, yes, our collection has about 5,000 species and hybrids of orchids. It's accredited nationally. It's one of the biggest orchid collections in the world, and we're a repository of that genetic material that orchids families represent, right? So public gardens have a big role in that, in ex situ conservation, which means you are not conserving inside where their habitat is, but in greenhouses and places like that. So we do have that 5,000 species. The orchid family, though, has 30,000 species of orchids worldwide. And they grow in every place, every continent except Antarctica. So orchids are extremely adaptable to all different kinds of conditions and habitats, temperatures. They grow up in the Himalayas. They grow up in different type of environments, right? They're very, very adaptable. And they're also a very strong indicator of the health of an ecosystem. So they are important for people trying to understand conservation, trying to get to the root of what's going on. And that's something that our exhibition represents really well. So we decided, as we were investigating collaboration, we wanted to highlight what other Smithsonian units do related to orchid conservation or orchid research. So we highlight throughout the exhibition, which is a space that has 8 raised planters with plants in them and trees. I have some really neat tropical trees here that are 25 foot tall. We are highlighting different stories about conservation and different ways in which you can conserve the plants. And we highlight things like the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. They do a lot of basic research on orchids and pollination and orchid physiology. There's highlights of the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center here in Maryland, where they're investigating the ecology of orchids, and especially native orchids of Maryland and the whole country. Our United States has about 200 species of native orchids. Wow. So not all orchids are the tropical ones that you're used to. And then they do a lot of studies with the mycorrhizal fungi, which associate with a lot of plants, but in orchids they're essential for orchid germination and orchid growth. And that's a very important approach to conservation, involving as many people as you can and as many areas as you can.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for all that awesome information, Virginia. I think we're going to hear from now Phaan, who is the artistic side of this collaboration. But it's okay if we check back in with you after that interview?
Absolutely.
Right. Hi, Phaan. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
It is very exciting. We have kind of an interesting intro here because we just heard from Virginia over from the Smithsonian Gardens about the really cool Future of Orchids exhibit. And now we have the artist of that exhibit here with us today, which is very cool. And I know what plant you're going to choose, and just right off the bat, we're not choosing an orchid. So we're kind of making a left turn here and talking about a different plant. But we'll probably get back to orchids a little bit at the end. But Phaan, what plant did you choose to share with us today?
I chose the snake plant.
Awesome.
And I guess I tell you why now, right?
Yeah, please. Why is it meaningful to you?
So I guess I always felt like the snake plant is the underappreciated plant and or an underappreciated house plant because typically, or not typically, but it's just more like I was doing research on, how house plants came to be. And then just also like, I personally do like the way snake plants look, etc. But like, they're always just seen as like more objects, like good for like air quality and also easy to grow, but not as like this, you don't see it with plant influencers with their giant monsteras and begonias and stuff like that. They're always like about those. And I was like, well, that's not cool. Like what about this snake plant? And kind of wanting to do more research and history about it, to like find out more about the snake plant beyond its, usefulness and all that stuff, like the science and everything. And then turns out that they were way cooler. Like they were used, like, they're used to like make bowstrings. They're native to Central Africa. And they're also related to certain deities that they have there, like the god of war and the goddess of war, I believe. And I hope I'm not getting that wrong. But yeah, and that was just basic Wikipedia search, which is, I was like, why doesn't anyone know this?
That's so interesting. You're right. So I've said this on the show before. I'm weirdly, for having a plant podcast, not much of a houseplant guy. In fact, right now I only have 2 houseplants. I have I actually have a rattlesnake plant, which is a very different species, but similar name. And then I have like a little succulent. But you're right. I know snake plant. I can picture it in my mind. And for me, like even more than a lot of houseplants, it seems like furniture. At least it is the way that I like the perception that I think we take it to be in this like this context, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
So yeah, I know it is weird, and like, but I just love that they just have like, I don't know, for some reason to me visually that they had way more potential than the Monstera, and then so I did do, and I'm still continuing a series of paintings called, like, that I cleverly call Snakes on a Plane, but it's PLAIN, not like the airplane plane, like the movie. because they kind of do grow like in a plain, like a field of grass almost. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then, and like in the wild, that is, and not the cultivated ones, obviously. And so just have them, yeah, just like kind of like these like very close up paintings of like snake plants, but kind of in this imagined future of, so they're multicolored, or they go with the theme of like a certain exhibition that I'm doing, or I have them battling a monstera kind of, yeah, and like call it like snakes or like kind of like monstera versus predator or something, like, you know, like kind of something, anything related to like a funny blockbuster action movie, I guess, taken place in the 80s and 90s. And well, I guess Snakes on a Plane was more recent. That was
2000s for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Cool.
it felt like the 90s.
Yeah, it was. And so kind of, yeah, like giving them these, I would say, pop culturally appropriate titles to kind of like bring more, I wouldn't say like awareness, but just like, I guess, more fun attention to them. And then, but just like, painting them is fun because you can have them weave around each other and all that stuff visually. And so that's why I kind of started like really becoming, not, I wouldn't say obsessed. I don't own like a bajillion snake plants or anything because, you know, like again, like thinking about plants as objects, which is I'm trying to like get everyone away from, is like to not think of them as objects, but that they're actual living things versus like decor or, you know, again, being objectified and or cultivated and
literally objectified.
Literally,
yeah. Interesting. Okay, I want to get to snake plants specifically in a second, but I'm actually curious now that you've talked about this a little bit about how did your like art and as far as focusing on plants in general start? And talk me through that a little bit because it's very interesting.
Oh yeah. So like a while back, like I used to do all these landscape paintings of like what I called an optimistic post-apocalypse future, and that was just the landscape looking completely different and the earth kind of finding maybe like defensive ways to defend itself from like the next Star Trek generation coming down to like, you know, reoccupy or all that stuff. So a lot of things I really think about movies and especially these types of movies. Anyways, and there's like a moment where, you know, kind of switching away from that, like, and just really wanting to understand why we feel compelled to, you know, mow a lawn, have gardens, all this stuff to kind of have like this kind of control over plants in a way versus like when they're just like plants, they're just, you know, they grow, they do their thing, etc. And but here we are paying a lot of money for landscaping. Here we are on, you know, social media, like becoming plant influencers, let's say, or, you know, stuff like that. And it's just like I thought it was so bizarre. And like, and also like, okay, but if we love plants in this way, where we love them as like these objects, these precious things that we would go pay $100 for or something, you know, and let it die on accident because we don't know how to maintain it, which seems kind of up. Oh, if I could say that, sorry. And, you know, and so like there is this, you know, like this plant economy or plant capitalist economy that is around it, but somehow we can't handle climate change or handle like, you know, like deforestation and all this other stuff. We can only control what we have immediately. But like kind of wanting to figure out like, what is this control? What is like all this other stuff? And for some reason, and I forget why, it just led me down this rabbit hole of wanting to know where houseplants came from, because I felt like that was like the most direct control that we have right now that anyone can relate to versus like having a yard and landscaping, etc. And so I was like, wait, where did houseplants, who was like, you know what, let's keep plants in our house, you know, like let's go do that. And then what a great idea. And then going down the rabbit hole of research and discovering that like it really peaked during the Victorian era, which is when, you know, you have a lot of like plant explorers or plant hunters going out and just like pulling plants from wherever they have colonized, et cetera, and bringing them back to England. And then you have like all the English people at that time being like, whoa, like, look at these weird things. Like they're weird. Like they look very alien to them. They are like bizarro looking. But also because of the Industrial Revolution, people were able to heat their homes more and keep it warmer. There was like a glass tax that was like taken away. So before it was only rich people who could afford to send people out to bring plants back and put in their greenhouses and all that stuff. And I guess be rich, and then but so now like the middle class was able to afford houseplants, and they wrote a lot about it, and they, like there's like magazines about like how to keep your houseplant, blah, blah, blah. And like, but also like they would have like parties where they're like, look what plant I got, and it was kind of like what we do now with, Instagram, where like, this is my Monstera, like, like not to say that there's nothing wrong with Monsteras, but it's just like this exotification and objectification of these plants when there's probably way more significance to it. I guess like trying to like break those relationships and really seeing them not as objects or as like they're just here to help us, like, but we need to also be helping them. And so kind of, and I know painting really doesn't help with that, but I feel like, but like finding ways to tell the story is what I guess kind of drives me to create the content for my painting and for work that I do, like say for even like for the Orchid show at the Smithsonian. But also I am starting a graphic novel, which, by like the snake plant is the main character.
Oh, cool.
And they all have this awakening, like the Kate Chopin novel, and which is Victorian, and like realize that they have been taken from their native places and cultivated and, put in a pot, not being able to be in the wild, be objectified. And they convene and they try to kill all humans, like the Terminator movie.
Amazing.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, this is awesome. I really love this. First of all, I do think, you said that painting does nothing, but I disagree. Like, getting people to think about like the world that we have created and like our place in it is what art really does. And so thank you for that. And all these things that you've brought up are really interesting. I mean, we've talked about some of these things on the show a little bit before, about the origin of houseplants and the kind of colonial origin of houseplants. And also this like inherently houseplants kind of need to be tropical because the indoors of our house are more tropical because they're shady and more humid and they have the same temperature all year round, right? And so it's this like kind of inversion of where plants come from into these areas where not. That's super interesting. The other thing that you bring up, which we've talked about on the show, I talk about this concept far too much on the show, is this concept of a called plant awareness disparity. And that's the idea that humans don't see plants kind of at all. Like if you show someone there's a really great there's like a test that people show, which I've shared before on social media, where it's a Rousseau picture of a jungle, and there's a bunch of monkeys and plants, and then you ask people what the picture is of, and they say it's a picture of monkeys, even though there's more plant species in the picture than there are monkeys.
Yeah, they're hiding in those plants.
Right. We like identify with mammals, and we don't see plants as the individual life forms that they are. And if you, but at least, and that's actually not a universal. It's actually a very cultural thing. Some cultures have much stronger connections to plants as individuals.
Yes.
And so it's really cool though, because once you start thinking about it, it's much easier to actually like, oh yes, this is a creature that has its own life and has its own way of being that may be very different from mine, but it has it. So anyway, that's so everything you just said there about post-apocalyptic plants killing all humans.
It's real.
It's real.
It's real. It could totally happen.
Yeah.
You
for
know,
sure.
You never know. You don't know. I mean.
And I will say to the audience, just out of fairness, how you've said a lot of I think maybe slightly provocative things about houseplants, but there are houseplants in the picture that I'm seeing of you. So I think this is not an anti-houseplant.
No, yeah, definitely not. Like I'm just saying, let's like really. And I love that you talked about how you only have 2 houseplants, which I think is awesome because it's like owning a pet. It's like having a dog or a cat. It's like someone's got to water it. You got to make sure it's happy. You can't like just let it die. And I do feel and a part of it is like me thinking like I'm a bad plant keeper also in a way, like, and right. And then, so it's not really fair for me to like just keep buying these plants just for them to die. 'Cause they are like living things. They are, we have to take care of them. And just because like we have no idea if they have brains and all that stuff or not, like they're like, hello, but like they do have like ways of, communicating. They do interact like they go towards the sun. It's just like they do stuff. It's like and they're not just like dormant and do nothing. They grow, and I feel like if it's growing, it's got to be living. And I do my best to take care of my plants the best I can. But, it's just like if you don't have time, just like if you don't have time to take care of an animal, like why do you have to get plants? And then that also was kind of the thinking of like, so why are we so obsessed to have these plants when if we can't take care of them, but like still feel like this desire to have this attachment, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's like also probably related to like a desire to connect with nature in a way, but still have control over it. It's there's I mean, I'm sure there's some psychologists.
So much to dissect. Much to dissect.
For sure. But instead of going down that, because I think we could do that for a long time, let's talk about snake plant specifically. Okay. What are some fun facts and dazzling details about snake plant?
I guess I found out that like somehow like I came across a thing that it could treat alopecia or some places where using, and it has like medicinal properties to it. Like it could slow down cancer. And I don't know how much of that there is. It's not like I was like reading papers or anything like that. But the most significant I found was the fact that it was native to Central Africa and like kind of like a deserty tropical situation.
So
and
that's really interesting that you mentioned just there, because you mentioned that it's like it doesn't grow in the understory, like it grows more in like a plains kind of open area. Is that what you mentioned?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
I always don't worry about that. I always tell the audience don't be afraid to Google it. Yeah, it's just interesting if that's true. I'm going to Google this right now myself because most houseplants, are these understory plants just because of that shade tolerance. But maybe they're a little bit more. Snake plants are almost like borderline succulent, right? They're like so that might make sense too, because succulents also do well in houseplants. But that's very interesting.
They don't need a lot of water either. You can like the soil can dry out before, because they're used to like I guess because of an arid landscape, like hoarding water. So like you can't overwater it, otherwise like the roots will rot. And which I've done multiple times where I'm like having this glorious like snake plant, and then all of a sudden it's like I've overwatered it, thinking like, oh, it's tropical because everything else is tropical. Like this is like a very naive perception before learning about this. And then it's like, oh, so that's why I've had killed some of my snake plants in the past and stuff. And another thing that I really like about them that I also found out about was like the patterning of the snake plants, depending on which type of snake plant, is about defense. It's like kind of like its own self-defense mechanism. Just kind of like how, I guess when we go back to orchids, like certain orchids have like patterns that are made specifically to attract certain pollinators. So in a way, and then again, it was just like, oh, that's amazing, because a lot of me is thinking about how do plants defend themselves in the future, and like, using like maybe, I guess, things that humans would use to kind of use as like a war defense in war or something, and like camouflage, for instance. And again, why all my paintings have like the plants kind of like camouflage and like in plain sight, etc., because it is like this kind of aposematic, like self-defense way to kind of get you confused, so you don't, I guess, kill these plants, or I don't come in and kill these plants with a lot of water.
I'm looking right now. I'm looking at so many cool pictures of snake plants like in the wild, which I've never done before, and that's something I feel like people don't ever do with houseplants, of like look at them in their like native habitat. But it's really cool to see that. Yeah. But I also just realized that they're in genus Dracana, which I don't think I would have guessed, because we've had at least one other Dracana on the show before, and they kind of seem pretty different than the. I
think they have two genus names. I think like one is no. Like one is Dracana, and then the other one, it starts with an S. I think two. They went through like a name. It's like Sansevieria.
Oh, I see that. Yeah,
Sansevieria. I am obviously not a professional plant person, even though I love painting plants. But I just handle that part.
Saying those Latin names is always a challenge. I really. But that is interesting because I don't like. I think we talked about Dracana. Oh, what's the one? This called the corn plant. That's the Dracana, right? It's corn plant, which is a weird name because it's not corn. Dracaena fragrans. That's right, because it smells really good when it flowers. But it seems very different to me than. So that's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that it's that they're Dracaena.
Right.
Very cool. Do you have anything else in your notes there about snake plant? Fun facts and dazzling details about the snake plant?
Aside from the fact that the Chinese or like a lot of Asian countries really love using it as like a money plant, not like the money plant you see, but the fact because it grows for feng shui and stuff, like the fact that it grows upward and points upward, it's just like kind of like this uplifting of like you're going to grow your wealth and all that stuff. So I was like, yeah, double benefits or like triple. But again, that's like treating it as this object. But I guess like they put more care into it, knowing that it could bring in dollars versus like it's good for my air quality or not that everyone should have good air quality. But
even though I'm not sure if we've gotten to that NASA clean air study in a while, but it's the way people treat that study is pretty dubious. Like it's true the plants can filter air, but the number of plants you would need to have in a house for it to have like an effect beyond the like basic air exchange that houses go through is like a really ridiculous amount.
You need a whole forest.
I read somewhere. So I mean, it's true. Plants can do that. They definitely can filter air, but it's just a volume thing and an amount thing. And when they did the study, they put the plants in a box, right, where it's the only thing in the plant is air in a box, and then they calculated the differences in different molecules, so it's true. It's just and of course, there's probably some plant influencers that have enough plants in their house to make that happen.
Oh yeah. They have a whole their own place, their own island.
Indeed. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, so did we miss anything? Anything else you got in your notes there?
I don't know. I guess I do love that you can make bowstrings, you can make rope.
You mentioned that at the beginning. Talk to me about that functional aspect, which I think we never talk about with this plant.
So I guess since it is from like native to Africa, like they do use that as like a source, like a fiber source and stuff for like clothing, basket weaving, etc. So again, like this other, secondary, like it's like functional thing where it's just like this reciprocal, I guess, use versus like, I don't know, like, which I don't know. I just find interesting. Like, again, like we are all about the scientific uses for it, like air purification and the fact that it won't die. And, there's other places that are like more about it in different ways. And so why are there not plant influencers out there like caressing their like snake plants and stuff like that? All their, and so not that I'm trying to get plant influencers to go and show off their snake plants, but it would be nice if they could, but also not necessary because I'm kind of tired of plant influencers. No offense, plant influencers, but stop objectifying plants. Like,
this is good. This is good. I love this, and definitely no offense to plant influencers. But if any plant influencers out there wanna like come at the show, I'll take the heat because we have honest conversations here about plants.
Same.
Yeah.
Even though we're not plant experts, but
that's true. That's definitely true.
Enough is enough. I have had it with these mother snakes on this mother plane. Everybody strap in. I'm about to open some windows.
Well, thanks so much for sharing about snake plant with me. Do you mind if I share a plant with you?
Yeah, cool.
So you chose snake plant, and I was like, what am I going to choose? And then it was really obvious because it's a plant that grows in my yard, and it's called snakeberry, or at least that's one of the common names, snakeberry. Have you ever heard of snakeberry before?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm going to show. I got some right here. I'm going to show it to you on camera, even though the audience can't see it. But here it is.
Oh, that thing! Yes, that looks like a strawberry, but looks like a weed at the same time. Or it grows everywhere. Yeah.
It grows everywhere. And if you've... so the first thing about this is a lot of people will tell you that this... so audience doesn't know. It looks like a little strawberry. The leaves look very similar to strawberry too. And a lot of people will tell you that the fruit is poisonous, but it is definitely not. It's not poisonous. It just doesn't taste like anything.
Oh.
In fact,
it's just the berry.
You know what? We'll get into it in a minute. It definitely doesn't taste like strawberry. It's not very sweet at all, but it's not unpleasant. It's totally fine. It's very low in sugar. We're so used to strawberries being very, very sweet.
Right.
I'm not quite sure where this myth came that they are toxic. I think it might have to do with the name snakeberry, and that people associate snakes with venom and things like that, and so you have something called snakeberry.
Look very snaky.
Well, I was trying to get to the bottom of this too. Why is it called snakeberry? And actually, its most common name in this part of the world is actually either mock strawberry, which makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
or Indian strawberry, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not from India, but it's one of those things at some point people just said, well, anything that's from the East, we're going to call Indian.
Yeah.
But in several languages, it's called snakeberry, and I first heard it called snakeberry before I heard it called mock strawberry. So that's why I know it as snakeberry, but I think most people in this area would start off calling it mock strawberry.
Huh.
But I think I couldn't get to the bottom of this. These plants that are like these little weeds that don't really have great houseplant potential or great food potential or great other ornamental potential. I think a lot of those just kind of get ignored. So like the record about reading about these is not very much. And so I couldn't really get to the bottom of why they're called snakeberry, except for I'm pretty sure, this is also hard for me as a non-Chinese speaker to figure out, but I'm pretty sure one of the most common names for it in Chinese also means snakeberry.
Huh. Do you know how to say it in Mandarin?
Oh, man, I have it somewhere. Give me a moment. I'm gonna give this my best shot. Apologies.
Okay. Let me see if it translates correctly. Not that I'm like also.
Let's see. Shay Mei. Does that sound right?
No, I'm like, wait, what is snake in Chinese? It's like May. Like, I guess. I wonder what the May is. May is
I'm gonna. I don't know if you know your character. Do you know the?
No, I don't know. But you can send it to me. Okay. I'll send it to my parents, and I'll be like, "What does it say?" Like.
Okay, great. And I'll do some fact checking on that. But I did find a couple sources. One from a Taiwanese website, and then there was, I think the Chinese Wikipedia also had that in there. I visually checked the characters are the same, so
interesting.
I think that's what it means, and I think it's because the way, from what I've understood, I think the way that it moves along the ground, it has these stolons that spread and they move around. That the small thin branches, the way they move, might look like little snakes. And I did find one reference. And I'll put a link in the show notes. The audience will have to click translate on it because it's in Chinese. One of the other common names, which I think is really cute, is, I guess the direct translation is, and this is, once again, computer translating from Chinese for me, but it happened in a couple different places, so I think maybe the direct translation is correct, but is snake bubble grass.
Snake bubble grass.
Which I think makes sense if there's the snakiness part, but then the berries are the little bubbles, and then I think yeah. So
okay.
Let me Google that again. Snake bubble grass. Does that work? No, I'm the wrong Wikipedia. Anyway, I'll put a link to that in the show notes because there was an article there. It was an article written in Chinese that was explaining the same thing. You probably heard as a kid that these are poisonous, but they're actually not. This is this cool plant called.
Maybe it's a way
and I think they do have go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say to get kids to not eat them because, like usually if you associate something with bad, they won't eat it. Like, fairy tales and stuff like that, how they're just like, don't go into the forest and, they just, or I don't know.
Yeah,
that's
a good
go
point.
ahead.
I mean, I think there's no problem with kids. I think there's no problem with kids eating them, but actually now just thinking about now that I have a small kid, they look like strawberries, and you probably just don't want her grabbing random stuff. So, and it's all over the yard. So maybe that's where the poisonous thing came from. Because like even though they're not poisonous, you don't want your kid just grabbing random stuff and eating it when they think it looks good. So,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
So that's kind of the whole mystery with that. The name. There like with snake plant, there are lots of references to various medicinal uses, and this is like almost every plant has something like that. People use plants are like the pharmacy of the wild, right? And they have so many uses. So I don't know many of the details about that, but it is common. And then the other thing I learned about it, which is actually from when I was Googling, I ended up on a blog post from my friend and former guest of the show, Mallory O'Donnell, and he has a website called How to Cook a Weed. And,
That's awesome.
he was talking about this. It's a great site, and he's a great follow on Instagram. But he was talking about how he used to eat these all the time when he was a kid, and he thought that he called them wild strawberries and he'd eat them all the time. And I when I first saw them, that's what I thought they were. I was like really excited when I saw these little strawberries all over my yard. But then he later learned that they were not strawberries, and that's why they don't taste great. But he kind of had this kind of rethinking of them, and I think once you taste a berry and you're like, this doesn't taste like a strawberry, you just kind of discard it. But he mentions in this blog post that he didn't learn for a long time, and I didn't learn that until literally today when I was reading this blog post by Mallory, that the leaves are also edible apparently. And apparently a nice edible green that is available for a very long part of the year. And so I'm going to eat the leaves right now. I'm going to see.
What does it taste like?
He says that he says, and I agree with him here, he says the leaves are an excellent food and tea, faintly tasting of cucumber with a hint of sage. And I think I agree with that.
Huh.
Like it's not the most... It's like that, not the most delicious green, but if you're like adding something to a salad, I do want to try the tea. Because that's I read a few more things later that can be pretty tasty. But it's just one of these things in our yard. I think because it doesn't taste good, the berry doesn't taste how we expected. We just kind of like cast it aside and be like, that's just that annoying weed in the yard. That's not a real strawberry.
Right.
It's not a strawberry. It's a snakeberry.
Right. And like I feel like it still is it's underappreciated, just like the snake plant, and maybe, I don't know, that's so wild because like I have it also growing in my backyard, and it grows very productively and it is everywhere. And it is kind of like sad that we can't, if we knew we could cultivate it, but also like, I feel like the Chinese have also, in the past, like, when they started like having Chinese gardens, like more for aesthetic reasons, having, I forget what berry it is. There was like a certain berry that from a tree, I think, that didn't taste that good, but they found a way to make it taste good and by making it into jams and stuff. So it wasn't really kind of like going to waste and stuff like that. So I do wonder if there is like, if we really, really, really did some digging to find out how it got this snake bubble berry, or if it's just like rich people trying to tell like poor people not to eat it so they can keep all the berries and stuff like that, which is possible.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, but that is so interesting, especially if it can be in tea form and all that stuff. And I guess I wonder if we've been just missing out this entire time. I mean, it grows like crazy here, like especially when
and I love
hits.
that. Like weeds, we talk about that on the show. Weeds, that's often just not a great word to describe things. Like what is a weed? And in this case, this is a non-native species, and some people might argue invasive, but it's not the most offensive invasive around. There's lots of other weeds that are invasive that are way more spreading and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's also cool when there's an edible weed, an edible non-native quote unquote weed.
Yeah.
It's great
That's
because
how
you can harvest it with and you can harvest it without damaging a local ecosystem, which is cool. In fact, you can probably help the local ecosystem by eating it. So I'm going to try that some more. But yeah, a couple other just quick things about it that I think are interesting. One, the easiest way to tell the difference between this and real strawberry the berries, once you know they're not strawberries. They're really small. They don't have quite the right shape. They don't have the quite texture. But before the berries come and there's just leaves, it's pretty tricky. The leaves are also smaller. The leaves are also smaller, but they look almost identical. And this is where actually it's pretty interesting because we mentioned this earlier. Sorry, I have a snakeberry seed in my throat.
Are you sure you're not dying? It's like not
Yeah.
poisonous, and you're just slowly
I
like.
was wrong.
Sorry.
I was
Oh, that would
wrong.
not be good.
No, I'm alive. I'm okay,
Cool.
audience. It's very good. But they look so similar to a strawberry, but they're not in the same genus as a strawberry.
Huh.
They are in the same family, but they are not in the same genus. So strawberries are Fragaria, and this is Potentilla.
Potentilla.
So the full name for this plant is Potentilla indica. So indica is that incorrect reference to being from India. Somebody gave it a long time ago. The Potentilla, there's another plant that's called Potentilla reptans that I just learned about. I'm gonna look up a picture
What?
of it.
So it's like a reptile?
And no, I think reptans means something else related to its healthful aspects, and potentilla means little potent thing. And the Potentilla reptans, I think, was very widely used as like a folk medicine in Europe and Asia and Africa. It's a pretty common thing. And so this is in the same genus, but isn't as used as much like that. I guess it is used a little bit for some medicinal stuff, but they do look very similar. I think the fruit of the Potentilla reptans does not look the same, but the flowers, and this is the other key, if you ever see something that looks like strawberry and it has a yellow flower, it's not strawberry. It's the yellow flower means that it's most likely the mock strawberry, because strawberries have white flowers.
I see. Okay. Oh, that makes so much sense. Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. That's so wild. I wonder if we did not know what strawberries were in the first place or ever had a strawberry, would we be eating this berry?
Yeah, maybe, and I think that's the way that I'm looking at it. I mean, there's definitely way sweeter berries. Even we've got around the corner a lot of June berries, which are a native berry, and they're great and sweet. It's definitely one of the least sweet and least. It doesn't have a ton of flavor as other berries, but it's also not toxic. A lot of berries that don't taste like anything, you probably wouldn't want to eat at all. And I bet you could add a little sugar or some honey to it. It's gonna be great. And who knows what to do with it. So I'm gonna try to go down that rabbit hole a little bit more about how people are using the berries. But I think the leaves are kind of the not thought of part of this plant that apparently are really useful, and you can add them to tea, you can add them to your salads, you can do all sorts of stuff with them. So that's really
good to know. I also wonder how they jumped over here, how they got to the U.S.
That's a good question. I was really trying to get to the bottom of that, and that's hard a lot of times.
Yeah.
I did find some references that it was potentially brought over a number of plants in the early 1900s as an ornamental, and because it's a nice ground cover, and it does have pretty flowers and the berries look pretty, that someone might have thought it makes a good ground cover, but then it kind of very easily spread out of cultivation, and now it's everywhere. But I can't find any solid records about that. It looks to do this, I probably would need to go to some physical library and look up the
or an
USDA.
herbarium.
Or an herbarium. Actually, I'm gonna maybe talk to our friends over there at Smithsonian Gardens to see if they can help me get to the bottom of this. Because I did just before the show, I did just find one reference in this book that was talking about plant introductions by the USDA, and this was in the reference to Potentilla indica was in there was a line item for 1963, but that was about it. And kind of hard to believe it's that late, but maybe this was just one specific introduction. Anyway, it gets very complicated. There was a time, I think it's not as common anymore, but there was a time where the USDA was just bringing in tons of plants and then assessing their quote unquote value for whatever, for agriculture, for ornamental, things like that. A couple plants that stand out like that for me are the Bradford pear, which is much maligned, was introduced. It's a species. It's a cultivar of the Callery pear, which is a Chinese tiny pear. And also the Meyer lemon is apparently one that was brought over. That one is not much maligned. That one is a very enjoyed plant. So there's this time where like you mentioned actually with the snake plant. This was a little bit later than the Victorian era, but there was a time in the U.S. where we were sending out a bunch of these quote-unquote plant explorers, and they were going all around and just bringing back as much as they could. And then actually not too far from you, there was the plant introduction station. Let's see, plant introduction station,
Old Pond Road? No way.
Glendale, Maryland.
Wow.
Yep. Prince George's County, and this is a place where, in fact, this is where the original Bradford pear was raised, which is now spread into the wild. But a bunch of plants were brought in there, and I don't know if the snakeberry, this is where it's got its start. But there was like a concerted effort by the USDA to introduce plants to the United States, and they would bring them to the introduction station to like try to assess whether they were going to be problematic in some way or not, and they didn't always hit the mark on that. But I mean, the Bradford pear was one where they had it for years, and they were developing it. They're making various cultivars of it, and then they found one they thought was really great, and it was really great because it looked pretty. It was like a perfect yard tree, and it was. It was supposedly sterile. It supposedly could not spread, but they didn't realize that if you just had one other slightly different cultivar nearby, then they could crossfeed each other, and then it spread all over the place. Anyway,
so wild.
I think to bring it back to the snakeberry is a much less offensive introduced species, right? It's not something that we like all hate, and I feel like it shows the nuance in these kind of species, and I think it's something that we can appreciate. I'm going to try to appreciate it in my yard a lot more now, and maybe try to eat
me
the
too.
leaves, drink some tea. Well, that's actually a great transition because I want to talk about orchids for just a couple minutes here, and then at the end of the show, we're going to go back to an actual horticulturist, Virginia Thaxton, and she's going to tell us some more stuff about her show.
She's the best.
She's amazing, and but let's talk about your role in this future of orchids. We heard Virginia telling us about some of her favorite orchids and some of the stuff on the display and the meaning of the show on the plant side. But tell us your role and about the pieces you had in this exhibit, which unfortunately is closed, but you can see pictures of it online, which is very cool.
Yeah, that'll live forever. I guess they wanted to collaborate with an artist, and I was on there because I love futures and stuff or speculating futures, and it worked out where I was like wanted to go down an orchid rabbit hole, and then me kind of pitching to them this idea of like, okay, what if it was like this and or like this, and again like to kind of like say like bring the art to the orchids, even though orchids are art themselves, but just finding other ways for people, I guess, to appreciate orchids, or because some people, like the purists that love orchids, and you can totally see them at the show just like with their like digital SLR zoom lens, really like taking all the photos, and then those who really like the art and stuff like that, or are taking selfies and prom photos and stuff like that.
That's
with
awesome.
My backdrops. And but also it kind of helps I guess for me is like kind of being like helping to be a storyteller in a way, and and just finding ways to get people to engage with the orchids in a different way than just kind of like how I think when you have like hard sciences, it's kind of hard to reach out to like a mainstream audience. But also like I love doing research, and like I love picking people's brains, and like Virginia's brain, for instance, like what is this? How do you do that? And having this like direct knowledge and being able to go, I guess, behind the scenes to like their greenhouse and all that stuff, and really like learn about them and try to bring these I guess facts that I found really interesting into the sculptures themselves. So the sculptures that I did were 3D printed because I suggested, I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we 3D scanned the orchids? So everyone, this is kind of forever, and not, and hopefully people won't go out and try to find orchid, go orchid hunting and stuff like that. And when so many of them are already endangered, and also be able to 3D print them. So if you need to study them or whatever, you're not I guess killing an orchid,
Yeah, that's so cool. That's really cool. I when Virginia pointed out one of them was, so were they all 3D scanned, or how did that work with the sculptures? And then you reinterpreted them in the print?
Yeah. So they selected, I guess, because there are 8 beds, 8 orchids, different types of orchids that they wanted to focus on, and then had them 3D scanned by their digital production office within the Smithsonian. And then and they were able to do crazy high res scans. And then from those crazy high res scans, found a 3D printer who could print them for me. And I just felt like having them exactly the same size wasn't helpful, because it's small.
Mm-hmm.
It's some of them are so tiny. What's the point? but then like, again, like, because I like to go on research rabbit holes, etc., discovered these, like, they look like sculptures, but they're really, like those, like in medicine, like you have like those bodies, like where you can take apart, like dissect the body. It's like made of like, you could like a Mr. Potato Head, but
Yeah.
but
Like
for a body.
Yeah.
Yes,
I got it. Yeah.
They have the plant version actually made by this man. I think it's like George Brendel in the late 1800s, again Victorian era. Like, but he was from Germany, who made like these larger than life plant models out of paper mache, kind of like a Mr. Potato Head. And then you were able to take apart, and it was for teaching also, which I thought was fascinating. And they look amazing because they're like, and they tell you what the scale is, like, like they have like all this stuff, and they have like the common name on the label and all that, but they're giant, like the sculptures. But you can take them apart and dissect them using that. And I was like, that is awesome. Like if I had this in like biology class in high school, this would have been way more engaging than, reading something about it in a book. It's just not the same. Like it kind of becomes like this, like, again, like this extra, like interesting gateway into understanding plants, I felt like. And so I really wanted to like bring that back in a way. And like, cause I feel like now, since you have a kid also, like thinking about like when they're in school, it's like all about being on the computer and like, like Googling, and now there's like AI, and you're just like, no, like, and then like, but like having like this tangible object that's like larger than life, that kind of looks so surreal at its scale of being like, 24 inches by 24 inches, and being able to take it apart and see exactly like as if you were like, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, like dissecting a flower, for instance, like that could be way cool. And I kind of wanted, again, like thinking about like how orchids like seduce pollinators and all that stuff, thinking about like how these like 3D prints, even though I did manipulate them and all that stuff because I didn't want them to look like they're 3D printed, but wanting to bring the Brendel model back in this more contemporary form as a gateway for people to like get into plants. And if that's the way to do it, like, so be it. And hopefully could become a thing again to kind of get more people interested in plants or orchids or whatever, like, plant species that we want to focus on. And I hope I didn't go off on a tangent on that, but okay, cool.
No.
Yeah, so that's kind of what happened. And then the mountains and that were there were kind of to be like a placemaker to show that there's orchid species that grow in high altitudes and in colder environments, because we do think about orchids mostly as tropical, and that there are lithophytic, that's the ones that grow in rocks, orchids. And also I did like the cache pots that I made, that some of the sculptures that some of the orchids are sitting in are all like directly related to the research that I discovered, or like that I've learned through the Smithsonian and like their partners and stuff, where, like the mycorrhizal fungi relationships. Mm-hmm. So like all the gooey stuff that you kind of see on the sculptures are kind of like my representation of what mycorrhizal fungi could look like, even though they all look different, but mm-hmm. They all kind of look gooey, I guess, in the end. Or like they're usually growing on rotting logs, or they're growing on trees, like to show that they're epiphytic, like, and so trying to have those relationships so people can understand that they're not just like in a pot that you get at Trader Joe's was like important to me. Yeah. And that having this like kind of more imagined landscape, we'll say, kind of makes this extra layer of things to be more interesting and like kind of really be like, what's going on? Like, why is this, like, how do I think about the future of orchids by placing them in the future, or like this possible future, like, and so, yeah, I guess that's really how it all came about.
And we're back here in the Kogood courtyard with Virginia, and she's still watering all these amazing orchids here. And I guess maybe this is probably a really tough question, so I'm going to make it a little bit concise. What is your favorite orchid of the ones we're looking at right now, and just this side, because there's so many in here?
Yes, that favorite question is so difficult to answer for anybody that loves plants because on a day-to-day basis it can change, planter to planter it can change.
Sure.
But since we are actually in front of this bed, I have to tell you that my favorite is the protagonist of the story that we tell in this bed, and that is this little white flower, an orchid called Lycaste virginalis, form alba. Alba means white, so it's the white form of Lycaste. The one you can see here is fading already, but it has been here the whole 3 months. And because it's the protagonist of the story I'm about to quickly tell you, I just have left it there. Normally I groom the plants every single day. We groom the flowers. We take whatever is done totally blooming. It goes back to the greenhouse. We change out plants in the exhibition every week throughout the whole 3 months. But Lycaste virginalis is the national flower of Guatemala. A lot of Central American, Latin American countries, even in Asia, they have orchids as their national flower because they're like focal points of biodiversity for orchids. The Lycaste virginalis alba, when it was declared the national flower of Guatemala, there came a point where the flower almost went extinct in the wild because people wanted to go get it. They wanted to harvest it from the forest. They wanted to try to sell it. It becomes a source of income from communities that live in these forested areas. But there's a family, 3 generations, that have created an experimental station in Guatemala, starting with the grandfather in the 70s, just collecting orchids that he would find in the woods, on the floor, like let's collect them. Then the son in the 90s became an orchidologist, agronomist, botanist. He really researched the plant, how to propagate it, how to reintroduce it back in the wild. And now the grandson is a communicator and an artist that's taking the story worldwide and has the support of the government in Guatemala. And they have reincorporated their national symbol into the wild. And they have now methods of propagation that can then come to the communities. That's their next step. And teach them how to grow and how to potentially have nurseries where they don't have to go harvest the wild plants. And that's just such an amazing inspiration in conservation. Like, you know, plants are amazing. You can propagate them like in such many cool ways that if you can do it yourself and not go harvest them, not poach them is the word, from the wild, then that's just like gets us closer to leaving those natural habitats intact.
Wow, that's a really cool story, and I think it's a really great example of just this idea of collaboration, right? Because it's this story happening in Guatemala and a collaboration with people there, but also collaboration with government, and then a collaboration with the Smithsonian and artists and curation, and just a really cool example of
that was our message this year. Like, it really takes a village to conserve and preserve anything that we deem wonderful and important. So that would be my favorite today, right now.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, the people who hear this episode are not going to be able to see this exposition because it's closing very soon. But tell me about, I guess this happens every year.
This happens every other year, not necessarily always in the same place, because the Smithsonian is big. We have many museums. It may rotate around, but our whole exhibition is on our website, and you can read all the panels, all the script, look at photographs of it. So there's information online for everybody that wants to virtually tour it, sort of.
Excellent. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes, and thank you so much, Virginia, for sharing this awesome space that you're taking care of.
My pleasure. Yeah, this is an oasis of tropical plants in DC, and everybody's welcome to come.
My guest on this episode of Rootbound was Phaan Howng. Phaan is a visual artist who makes paintings about plants in an optimistic post-apocalyptic future. You can learn more about Phaan and her art at phaan.com. That is PHAAN.com. We also met Virginia Thaxton, who is an interior horticulturist with the Smithsonian Gardens. You can learn more about the Smithsonian Gardens at gardens.si.edu. If you like Rootbound and you want to help support the show, visit rootboundpodcast.com/support to find all the ways you can support the show, including supporting on Patreon. Rootbound is hosted by Steve Ellington, and I, for one, welcome our new snake plant overlords. Music by Christian Kriegesgota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside and you're in Washington, D.C., visit one of the many locations cared for by the Smithsonian Gardens. They really are a treasure.
Spider plant, does whatever a houseplant can. Needs some light, not too much. Thrives on care with a gentle touch. Look out, here comes the spider plant. In the thrill of the night, at the scene of a plant. It grows like time. Spider plant does whatever a houseplant can. Needs some light, not too much. Thrives on care with a gentle touch. Look out! Here comes the spider plant. Are we still recording?